My neighbor called the cops on a plane crash. I wish I was kidding, but Darlene Wickham actually dialed 911 to report ME for allowing unauthorized aircraft on my Texas ranch, while the paramedics were still pulling the pilot out of the wreckage. Here's how insane this gets. It's 6 a.m., I'm in my boxers helping an injured kid who just crash-landed his Cessna in my pasture, and this woman shows up screaming that I need to get this disgusting junk off my property immediately, because it's destroying everyone's home values. The smell of hot metal and aviation fuel hung thick in the morning air. The pilot's got a broken wrist, the fire department's spraying foam on smoking engine parts, and Karen over here is already writing up violation notices. You have exactly 24 hours to remove this trash or I'm fining you $500 every single day, she announced, waving her clipboard like a magic wand. I looked at her real calm and said, "Lady, that's a federal investigator pulling into my driveway right now." The color drained from her face faster than oil from a busted engine, because what she didn't know was that her little power trip had just triggered the biggest federal takedown our county had ever seen. What would you do if your HOA, Karen, tried to fine you for someone else's emergency? Drop your wildest neighbor horror story below. Now you might be wondering how a perfectly reasonable man ends up with a neighbor who thinks she can regulate airplane crashes. My name's Garrett Sullivan, 52 years old, former Air Force helicopter mechanic turned rancher. This 40-acre spread has been in my family since my great-grandfather bought it for $200 and a handshake back in 1890. After 20 years of military service and a divorce that taught me the value of solitude, this place became my refuge. The morning routine never gets old. Coffee steaming in the cool dawn air, boots crunching on gravel as I check the fence line, the sound of cattle stirring in the distance. I run a small aircraft restoration business out of the old barn. Nothing fancy, just bringing vintage planes back to life for collectors who appreciate honest craftsmanship over flashy marketing. For years, I had nothing but farmland surrounding me. Then the developers showed up like locusts, turning cornfields into Meadowbrook estates. 200 identical houses with names like the Hampton and the Charleston. My property got grandfathered in, which legally meant they couldn't touch me. Didn't stop them from wishing I'd disappear, though. Most new neighbors turned out decent. We borrowed tools, helped during storms, minded our own business. Normal Texas hospitality. But 3 years ago, Darlene Wickham rolled in from Orange County with her black BMW, her entitled attitude, and her absolute certainty that everyone else was living wrong. The woman looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Blonde highlights that cost more than most people's car payments, designer everything, and a smile that could cut glass when she didn't get her way. Within 6 months, she'd schmoozed her way into the HOA presidency. Within a year, she'd turned our quiet neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. Her strategy was surgical. First target, the Ramirez family, an elderly Mexican couple who'd maintained a gorgeous vegetable garden for decades. Darlene decided their tomatoes and peppers violated landscaping standards. When they struggled with the English paperwork, she got nasty about it, suggesting they might be more comfortable in a less regulated area. Next came the Johnsons, a young black family with 2 kids. Their crime? Installing a basketball hoop in their own driveway. Darlene claimed it attracted undesirable activity and lowered property values. The undesirable activity was 8-year-old Marcus shooting free throws after school. The pattern was clear as summer lightning. Darlene targeted anyone who didn't match her suburban fantasy. Older folks, minorities, working-class families, anyone she could squeeze out to make room for more appropriate residents. My turn came when she spotted my workshop from the main road. Never mind it was 200 yards from the nearest house, mostly hidden by century-old oak trees. She showed up unannounced, click-clacking across my gravel in designer heels that had no business on a working ranch. "This rusty eyesore needs to go," she announced, waving her manicured hand at my perfectly functional building. "Paint it beige or tear it down, your choice." I explained politely that my property predated her subdivision by about a century, making it exempt from HOA covenants. The smell of motor oil and leather from my workshop mixed with her overpowering perfume as she processed this information. "We'll see about that," she said, her smile turning predatory. "There are ways to deal with uncooperative neighbors." That was 2 years ago. Since then, she'd tried everything: code enforcement complaints, tax assessor challenges, even calling the fire marshal about unsafe fuel storage. Every attempt failed because I actually followed the rules, all of them, state and federal. The morning everything changed started like any other. Coffee steaming on the porch, Morning mist rising off the stock pond, the distant rumble of cattle moving to fresh grass. The air carried that perfect Texas morning smell: mesquite smoke, dew-dampened earth, and possibility. Then I heard the Cessna's engine coughing like a sick dog. The Cessna came in dead stick, engine quiet as a church mouse, gliding toward my back pasture like a wounded bird looking for safe ground. The kid flying it couldn't have been older than 23, did everything by the book. Found flat ground, kept his wings level, touched down soft as morning dew on grass. The plane bounced once, skidded 200 feet through my pasture, and settled near the stock pond with a final metallic sigh. I was running toward it before the dust cleared, first aid kit bouncing against my hip. "Sir, I'm real sorry about your property," the pilot kept saying, cradling his clearly broken wrist. "Engine just quit on me." "Don't you worry about my fence, son," I told him, checking his pulse. "Let's get you patched up first." What followed was textbook emergency response: fire trucks, ambulance, sheriff's deputy, even a news chopper because plane crashes beat traffic reports any day. The sharp smell of aviation fuel mixed with disturbed earth as paramedics worked their magic. Then, Hurricane Darlene made landfall. She came charging across my property in silk pajamas and house slippers that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. Completely ignored the injured pilot, completely ignored the EMTs, and launched straight into property management mode. "This is exactly why we have standards," she shrieked, gesturing at the wreckage like it was a personal attack on her lifestyle. "I want this eyesore gone immediately, or you're facing $500 in daily fines." Even the paramedics stopped working to stare at her. The news crew looked like they'd struck gold. Nothing sells like a Karen in the wild. "Ma'am," I said, calm as Sunday morning, "this is federal jurisdiction. NTSB has to investigate before anything moves." Her face went redder than a stop sign. "I don't care about your government acronyms. This is a family neighborhood, not some backwoods landing strip." The sheriff tried explaining federal aviation law, but Darlene just cranked up the volume. Every second got recorded by those news cameras. A middle-aged woman in designer sleepwear screaming at crash victims while first responders worked around her. 3 days later, she escalated to warfare. The violation notice appeared in my mailbox like a rattlesnake in a flower bed. Official HOA letterhead, legal-sounding language about abandoned vehicles, and neighborhood standards. $500 a day in fines, retroactive to Tuesday, plus immediate removal demands. Her handwritten note at the bottom made her real intentions crystal clear. "Perhaps this will help you understand that some people might be happier in less regulated areas." Some people. Right. That evening found me at the county law library, surrounded by the smell of old books and the fluorescent hum of cheap lighting. 20 years in the Air Force teaches you research skills, and I put them to work. Turns out Texas Property Code Section 202.04 is pretty specific about HOA limitations. They can't override federal law, period. I made copies of everything, including some interesting cases about selective enforcement constituting discrimination. Knowledge is power, especially when your opponent thinks you're too dumb to fight back. But the real bombshell came when I called my old Air Force buddy Jake, who works for the FAA in Dallas. Just wanted his take on the federal jurisdiction angle. "Funny timing," he said. "We got a complaint about your property 3 months ago. Someone claimed you were running an illegal airport endangering that subdivision." My coffee went cold in my hand. 3 months? But the crash just happened. That's what flagged it for us. Complaint was filed the same day as your accident, but hours before any investigation could prove safety issues. Like someone knew that plane was coming down. The pieces fell together like aircraft parts after impact. Darlene hadn't reacted to the crash. She'd been planning for it. "Here's the kicker," Jake continued. "Complaint included detailed aviation regulations and property surveys. Whoever wrote it knows aircraft operations inside out. We've assigned an investigator because filing false federal reports is serious business." Suddenly I was playing chess, not checkers. 5 days later, Darlene called an emergency HOA meeting about aviation safety, invited the local news, positioned herself as a concerned mother protecting innocent children from my reckless endangerment. The community center buzzed with nervous energy and burnt coffee smell as 40 neighbors squeezed into folding chairs. Darlene's PowerPoint presentation featured aerial photos of my property and apocalyptic warnings about unregulated aircraft activity. When she opened for questions, I stood with my folder of federal regulations and case law. "Mrs. Wickham," I said, addressing her directly while cameras rolled, "I'm curious about your FAA complaint timing. How'd you know to file aviation safety concerns 3 months before any aircraft ever landed on my property?" Color drained from her face faster than oil from a cracked engine block. She stammered about proactive protection, but damage was done. Half the room now stared at her with suspicious eyes. The meeting ended when Darlene suddenly remembered another urgent appointment. But here's what made the evening worthwhile. Afterward, neighbors started sharing their own Darlene horror stories. Martha Kowalski, threatened over her husband's memorial garden. Rico Vasquez, cited for kids' bikes in his own driveway. Every target shared the same profile: elderly, minority, working class, or just different from Darlene's suburban fantasy. That night, sitting on my porch with Cricket Symphony providing background music, I realized this war was just getting started. But now I knew something Darlene didn't. The feds were already watching her, and she'd just painted a target on her own back. Darlene hit back faster than a rattlesnake in August heat. Within a week, she'd hired Preston Blackwood, one of those Dallas lawyers with marble lobbies and rates that could bankrupt small nations. The lien notice arrived via certified mail, thick enough to stop bullets and full of legal gibberish designed to terrify normal folks into submission. They claimed I owed $3,500 in accumulated violations and threatened property seizure if I didn't pay immediately. Classic intimidation tactic, but my Air Force experience taught me something valuable. When someone's throwing fancy paperwork at you, they're usually bluffing about their actual legal authority. Meanwhile, Darlene launched her door-to-door campaign to protect neighborhood families from aviation dangers. She worked those subdivision streets like a seasoned politician, clipboard in hand, spinning stories about my dangerous hobby airport to anyone who'd listen. "Think about your children's safety," she'd tell worried parents, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Property values are already dropping because of these aviation incidents." The manipulation was textbook: create fear, offer simple solutions, position herself as the only thing standing between suburban paradise and absolute chaos. But here's where things got really ugly. My insurance company called Thursday morning. "Mr. Sullivan, we've received multiple complaints suggesting negligence on your part," said the adjuster. "We're launching a full investigation before renewal." Multiple complaints. That caught my attention like a fire alarm at midnight. "Who filed these complaints?" I asked. "Confidential, but I can say the caller demonstrated unusual knowledge of aviation liability standards." Red flag number 2. Most people know insurance like they know quantum physics, but someone was feeding my carrier very specific technical concerns about aircraft liability exposure. That evening, I found myself back at Rico's house for an impromptu strategy session. His kitchen smelled like Maria's incredible pozole, and the sound of their kids doing homework in the next room reminded me what we were really fighting for: normal family life without constant harassment. "My supervisor pulled me aside today," Rico said quietly. "Asked if I was having legal troubles that might affect my security clearance. Someone's been calling the office, asking questions about my character." The pattern was expanding. Darlene wasn't just attacking our properties. She was systematically destroying our professional reputations to force economic surrender. That weekend, I hit the courthouse records again. The smell of old paper and toner cartridges had become oddly comforting as I dug deeper into Darlene's business model. What I found would have made the FBI's white-collar crime unit drool with excitement. 3 houses in our subdivision had sold below market value in the past 18 months, all after harassment campaigns that followed Darlene's exact playbook. Escalating violations, legal threats, insurance complications, then mysterious buyers swooping in with lowball offers. Every single buyer, Wickham Holdings LLC. Every single flip, massive profits within 60 days. Simple math showed Darlene was clearing $200,000 profit per house through systematic intimidation. She'd turned HOA harassment into a real estate acquisition scheme, targeting vulnerable neighbors and forcing fire sales through legal terrorism. But the real gut punch came Saturday morning when Rico called at dawn. "Garrett, 2 guys in suits showed up at my construction site yesterday, told my foreman I was under investigation for insurance fraud and neighborhood disputes. Now my boss is asking questions I can't answer." The attack had expanded beyond our properties. Darlene was going after our livelihoods, trying to destroy us economically until selling became the only escape route. Martha got hit the same way. Someone contacted my grandson's school claiming I'm involved in safety issues and shouldn't volunteer for field trips anymore. They're trying to separate me from my own family, Garrett. That's when the light bulb clicked on. This wasn't random harassment. It was systematic isolation designed to make resistance impossible. Cut people off from employment, family connections, community support, then offer them one way out, sell cheap and disappear. Sunday afternoon, Rico hosted a secret meeting. 12 families crowded around his kitchen table, the worn wood surface covered with violation notices and legal threats. The smell of Maria's fresh coffee mixed with the tension thick enough to cut with a machete. She's running a business, I explained, laying out the property acquisition timeline. Harass, intimidate, force cheap sales, flip for profit. We're not neighbors. We're inventory waiting to be liquidated. Martha studied the documentation with her retired teacher's eye for patterns. Every family she's targeted has been elderly, minority, or working class. This isn't property management, it's demographic engineering. Rico nodded grimly. Back in Mexico, we had a saying, El lobo no duerme, the wolf never sleeps. She's hunting us one by one. We formed our defense fund that afternoon, pooling resources for real legal representation. But as neighbors drifted home through the fading Sunday light, I couldn't shake the feeling that Darlene's next move would be her most dangerous yet, because cornered predators don't retreat. They attack with everything they've got left. Monday morning brought the kind of surprise that makes your coffee taste like motor oil. The county tax assessor showed up at 8 a.m. with Darlene hovering behind him like a vulture in designer clothing. She'd convinced them I was running commercial aviation operations that required property tax reclassification. We need to conduct an emergency assessment, the poor guy explained, clearly uncomfortable being Darlene's puppet. There's been complaints about unauthorized business activities. I watched them poke around my property for 2 hours, Darlene pointing at everything from my workshop to my gravel driveway as evidence of airport operations. The woman could have made a ham sandwich sound like a federal aviation violation. When they demanded to inspect inside my buildings without a warrant, I politely declined. That set off another Darlene explosion. "This is obstruction of justice," she shrieked loud enough to wake cattle in the next county. "He's clearly hiding illegal operations." The assessor looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest rock. That night, I started documenting everything with my old digital camera. Every interaction, every violation notice, every crazy demand. My Air Force training kicked in. When facing hostile forces, thorough record-keeping becomes your best weapon. Research revealed something chilling. Darlene had pulled this exact scheme in Plano and McKinney, targeting working-class families near upscale developments. She'd turned neighborhood harassment into a profitable business model across 3 counties. The smell of fresh ink and copy paper filled my kitchen as I printed evidence files. Each page represented another family destroyed by systematic intimidation. Elderly couples forced from homes they'd owned for decades, young families bankrupted by legal fees, working people driven away by manufactured crises. Wednesday at 3 a.m., my peaceful ranch became an emergency response circus. Fire trucks, ambulances, hazmat crews, the whole parade screaming up my driveway because someone reported a hazardous chemical spill threatening the subdivision's groundwater. Fire Chief Bobby Martinez, who'd known me since high school, looked embarrassed explaining the anonymous tip. We spent an hour with detection equipment finding absolutely nothing wrong with my fuel storage or environmental systems. "Garrett, this is the 5th false emergency call from your area this month," Bobby said while his crew packed up. "Someone's gaming 911 dispatch like it's a personal weapon." My security cameras had caught something interesting. A black BMW circling my property at 2:30 a.m., 30 minutes before that emergency call. Thursday brought Agent Patricia Hayes from the FAA, 15 years investigating aviation incidents and sharp enough to cut diamonds with her stare. "Mr. Sullivan, we've discovered some irregularities," she said, settling into my kitchen with coffee that smelled like salvation after the week I'd endured. "The complaints about your property contain very specific technical language. Part 77 obstruction concerns, uncontrolled airport operations. Most civilians never heard these terms." She spread complaint copies across my table. "Whoever filed these understands federal aviation regulations inside and out." That's when she dropped the bombshell that changed everything. Mrs. Wickham's ex-husband works for Consolidated Aircraft Insurance. Their divorce settlement included access to aviation databases for business consultation. And that's how she knew exactly which technical buzzwords would trigger federal investigation. The room went quiet except for my coffee maker gurgling in the background. Darlene hadn't gotten lucky with aviation knowledge. She'd been using insider access to weaponize federal bureaucracy against her targets. "He's cooperating with our investigation now," Agent Hayes continued. "Turns out she'd been threatening him for months, claimed she'd report him for providing classified data to unauthorized parties if he didn't help her harassment campaigns." The mini-twist hit like a cattle prod to the brain. Darlene had been playing chess while we thought she was just throwing tantrums. Friday brought her nuclear option. Professional process servers hit 8 houses simultaneously, delivering million-dollar lawsuit papers for defamation, conspiracy, and interference with business operations. Classic slap suits designed to crush people through legal costs rather than actually win in court. Rico called first. "They're suing me for $300,000, man. I can't afford to fight this." Martha called, crying. "Garrett, they want $400,000 from me, my grandson's college fund, everything I have." But Darlene had made one fatal mistake. Filing these lawsuits while under federal investigation created a paper trail proving systematic witness intimidation. Agent Hayes called it prosecutorial gold. That evening, I sat on my porch watching sunset turn my pasture into liquid amber. The smell of evening primrose mixed with the distant sound of kids playing in the subdivision. Normal life continuing despite the chaos. Rico's text came through as darkness settled. "Neighbors want to fight back. Ready when you are." 12 families had been targeted, harassed, and threatened, but we weren't backing down anymore. Time to show Darlene what happened when predators picked the wrong prey. Saturday morning at the courthouse started with me drowning in property records and ended with me holding a smoking gun that would destroy Darlene's entire operation. The musty smell of old documents and the fluorescent hum of government buildings had become my second home as I dug deeper into Wickham Holdings LLC. Something about Darlene's financing had been bugging me. How does someone afford multiple house purchases while hiring expensive lawyers and running harassment campaigns? That's when I found the first crack in her armor. Wickham Holdings had outstanding tax liens totaling $340,000. Not just business taxes, personal liens against Darlene herself for 3 consecutive years. The woman lecturing everyone about standards hadn't paid her own taxes since moving to Texas. But the real bombshell came from the business filings. Darlene had been claiming property tax exemptions on business use properties while simultaneously flipping them as residential investments. That's textbook tax fraud. You can't double dip like that without catching federal attention. IRS liens, state comptroller violations, franchise tax penalties for multiple shell companies. This woman was running a criminal enterprise disguised as neighborhood management. Agent Hayes called that afternoon with news that made everything click into place. "Mr. Sullivan, we need to talk. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour?" The diner smelled like bacon grease and bad decisions, but Agent Hayes' folder contained pure gold. She slid it across the cracked Formica table with the gravity of someone delivering classified intelligence. "Those aviation complaints contained restricted NTSB data," she said quietly. "Tail numbers, preliminary engine analysis, failure reports, information only available to involved parties and government agencies." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Darlene's complaints included technical details that wouldn't be public for months, maybe years. Someone with official access had fed her classified federal investigation data. "We traced it back to her ex-husband's insurance company login," Agent Hayes continued. "He came forward last week, claimed she'd been blackmailing him for months, threatening to report him for providing unauthorized data if he didn't cooperate." The conspiracy was federal now. Mail fraud, wire fraud, criminal tax evasion, witness intimidation. Agent Hayes rattled off charges like she was reading a grocery list. "She's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on everything. RICO charges for running a criminal enterprise." But the revelation that really floored me came that evening when Rico showed up with bank documents his wife's cousin had provided. "Garrett, you're not going to believe how she's been funding this whole operation," he said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "Every time she hits someone with HOA violations and fines, that money goes directly into Wickham Holdings' account." The scheme was diabolically simple. Target families with harassment, collect violation fines through the HOA, use that money to finance buying their properties when they finally surrendered and sold cheap. She'd weaponized the entire homeowners association to fund her real estate acquisition business. "Gets worse," Rico added. She's been claiming those HOA collections as business income for tax deductions while using the same money to buy properties she claims as business expenses, double dipping on every transaction. Martha arrived with cookies and the final puzzle piece. "I've been studying her timing," she said with the methodical precision of a retired teacher. "She targets one family every 6 months, always coordinated with county property tax assessment periods. Maximizes financial pressure while minimizing suspicion about the pattern." Everything made sense now. Darlene hadn't been running random harassment campaigns. She'd been operating a systematic criminal enterprise that combined tax fraud, housing discrimination, and federal crimes into one profitable package. But here's what gave me hope. Criminals fighting federal charges can't pursue aggressive civil litigation. Her legal position was fundamentally compromised, and her vulnerability window was wide open. The playing field was about to level, and Darlene Wickham was about to learn what happened when you picked a fight with the wrong federal agencies. Sunday morning found my workshop transformed into mission control for the most important operation of my civilian life. Evidence boxes covered every available surface, timelines stretched across my workbench like battle maps, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with motor oil and pure determination. Martha arrived first with her teacher's organizational skills and enough color-coded folders to make a Pentagon briefing jealous. Rico brought his laptop and a network of neighborhood contacts that would make the CIA envious. "We need a real lawyer," I said, spreading Agent Hayes' federal investigation timeline across my tool cabinet. "Someone who eats HOA bullies for breakfast and asks for seconds." Martha had already done the homework. "Rebecca Santos, civil rights attorney from Austin. 90% success rate against predatory housing practices, and she specializes in exactly this kind of systematic harassment." We pooled our legal defense fund, $18,000 from 12 families who'd scraped together everything from grocery money to vacation savings. Not much against Darlene's legal machine, but enough to get dangerous. Monday morning, I expected to leave a voicemail and wait a week for callback. Instead, Santos took my call personally. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been following your story. What you're describing is textbook Fair Housing Act violations disguised as property management." Her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd won battles others wouldn't even fight. She broke down the legal framework in terms a helicopter mechanic could understand. When HOAs selectively enforce rules against elderly, minority, or working-class families, that's federal discrimination regardless of stated intentions. Darlene's targeting pattern created what lawyers call disparate impact, policies that hit protected groups disproportionately hard. Here's the beautiful part about federal civil rights law. Win the case, and defendants pay all your attorney fees plus damages. It's specifically designed to level the playing field against deep-pocket harassers who think they can bankrupt regular folks into submission. Tuesday afternoon, Santos drove up from Austin and set up shop in Martha's living room. The smell of fresh-baked cookies couldn't mask the intensity as she reviewed our evidence with archaeological enthusiasm. "Documentation is everything in discrimination cases," she explained, flipping through our carefully organized harassment timeline. "You've proven selective enforcement better than most professional investigators manage in years of work." Rico's tech skills became our secret weapon. He created encrypted communication networks that kept us coordinated while protecting us from Darlene's social media surveillance operations. "She's been screenshotting our Facebook posts and using them in violation notices," Rico explained, showing us the evidence. "This keeps our strategy private while she keeps digging her own grave in public." Martha channeled 30 years of classroom management into witness preparation, turning nervous neighbors into confident testimony through practice sessions over coffee and cookies. "Truth is powerful, but only when presented clearly," she told Mrs. Isla, who'd been too scared to speak up before. "We're building a legal record that protects future families from going through what we've endured." Wednesday brought our first major offensive. Santos filed federal civil rights charges against Darlene, Wickham Holdings, and the HOA itself. 23 plaintiffs, $2.8 million in damages, systematic housing discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. "Federal civil rights cases get expedited review," Santos explained. "Judges understand that ongoing discrimination requires immediate intervention to prevent further community harm." Thursday delivered our strategic ace, emergency injunctive relief. Santos requested immediate court orders stopping all harassment campaigns while litigation proceeded. "Witness intimidation during federal civil rights cases is career-ending for defendants," she said with satisfaction. Courts protect communities aggressively when constitutional violations are documented this thoroughly. The legal education was eye-opening. Federal housing law wasn't just about rental discrimination. It covered any conduct targeting people based on protected characteristics. Age, race, national origin, disability status. Darlene's victim selection had violated multiple federal statutes simultaneously. Agent Hayes coordinated perfectly with our civil strategy. Criminal charges address her federal crimes, she explained during a three-way call. Your civil rights lawsuit addresses community harm and provides monetary recovery. They work together beautifully. Friday afternoon brought Santos's timeline. Discovery in 4 months, depositions starting in 60 days, trial early next year. But the real leverage came from Darlene's criminal exposure threatening her entire financial future. Defendants fighting federal charges can't pursue aggressive counter-litigation, Santos explained. Her position is fundamentally compromised, giving us enormous negotiating power. That evening, I sat on my porch listening to cattle settling for the night and subdivision families going about their normal routines, kids playing, adults talking over fences, the comfortable sounds of community life without fear. We'd transformed from isolated harassment targets into organized legal opposition with federal constitutional protection. Darlene's predatory business model was about to collide with the full weight of American civil rights law. The hunter had become the hunted. 2 weeks after filing federal charges, Darlene went completely off the rails. Facing criminal prosecution and civil rights lawsuits, she abandoned any pretense of legitimate HOA management and launched what could only be described as total warfare against our community. It started with the private investigators. Black sedans appeared on our streets like vultures circling roadkill. Professional surveillance teams photographed our daily routines, followed us to work, even sat outside our kids' schools taking notes. The sound of camera shutters clicking from parked cars became our new neighborhood soundtrack. Rico noticed them first. Garrett, there's been a guy in a gray Honda watching my house for 3 days. Takes pictures every time someone comes or goes. Martha got the same treatment. They're following me to the grocery store, documenting who I talk to, what I buy. It's psychological warfare designed to make us paranoid and isolated. But Darlene's desperation reached new lows with the sabotage campaign. My ranch fence got cut in 3 places overnight, sending cattle wandering onto subdivision roads. Had to spend Tuesday morning rounding up confused steers while neighbors complained about property damage and traffic hazards. Martha's memorial garden, the one honoring her late husband, got destroyed the same night. Plants uprooted, memorial stones scattered, 30 years of careful cultivation ruined by someone with serious anger management issues. Rico's kids couldn't keep their basketball hoops standing. Every morning brought another accident, knocked over, bent, mysteriously damaged, while security footage showed masked figures working under cover of darkness. We filed police reports, but proving Darlene's involvement was like trying to catch smoke with a fishing net. She was smart enough to use third parties and maintain plausible deniability. Then Agent Hayes dropped a bombshell that changed everything. Mr. Sullivan, we've identified the source of Mrs. Wickham's technical aviation knowledge, she said during our Wednesday meeting at the courthouse. Her ex-husband finally provided complete testimony about her blackmail operation. The revelation was staggering. Darlene hadn't just used her ex-husband's database access. She'd been systematically threatening him for months, claiming she'd report him for providing classified information to unauthorized parties if he didn't cooperate with her harassment schemes. He's been feeding her technical aviation data, insurance industry information, even federal investigation procedures, Agent Hayes continued. She knew exactly how to file complaints that would trigger automatic federal reviews. The conspiracy involved multiple federal crimes: blackmail, extortion, unauthorized access to government databases, filing false federal reports. Her ex-husband's cooperation had given investigators a complete roadmap of her criminal enterprise. We're looking at RICO charges now, Agent Hayes said. Systematic racketeering under color of law, using official processes to commit fraud and harassment. But Darlene's public relations war reached peak insanity with her social media campaign. She created fake neighborhood safety pages claiming I was operating an unregulated aviation facility that endangered children. Posted manipulated photos suggesting constant air traffic over subdivision properties. Even created fictional testimonials from concerned parents worried about aircraft noise and safety hazards. Rico's computer skills came in handy tracking her digital fraud. She's using multiple fake accounts to amplify her posts, he explained, showing me the evidence. Same IP address, same writing patterns, but pretending to be different people supporting her claims. The manipulation was sophisticated but sloppy enough to create legal evidence of systematic defamation and fraud. Meanwhile, our community solidarity was driving Darlene absolutely crazy. Instead of fragmenting under pressure, neighbors started coordinating schedules to provide mutual support. Martha organized carpools for court appearances, reducing individual isolation. Rico set up neighborhood watches that documented harassment while providing safety through numbers. Kids adapted faster than adults, turning the crisis into adventure. Children's playdates rotated between targeted families, normalizing the situation while building stronger community bonds. The psychological pressure on Darlene became visible. Neighbors reported increasingly erratic behavior, screaming phone calls to city officials, public meltdowns at HOA meetings, desperate attempts to recruit allies who were backing away from association with her legal troubles. Friday brought her most desperate gambit yet. Darlene attempted direct bribery, approaching city council members with campaign contributions in exchange for emergency aviation restrictions targeting my property specifically. She offered Rico's employer a lucrative HOA maintenance contract if they terminated his employment for character issues. Most brazenly, she approached Martha with a fake charity donation, suggesting a memorial scholarship in her husband's name if Martha would recant her testimony and withdraw from our federal lawsuit. The corruption was so blatant that even her remaining supporters started distancing themselves. Professional associates severed business relationships to avoid legal contamination. Family members stopped appearing publicly with her. Agent Hayes called Saturday morning with news that made everything worthwhile. Federal grand jury has returned indictments, she said, barely containing her satisfaction. Mail fraud, wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy, filing false federal reports, witness intimidation. She's looking at federal prison time regardless of plea negotiations. That evening, sitting on my porch watching sunset paint my pasture gold, I realized we'd reached the turning point. Darlene's systematic harassment had transformed our random collection of neighbors into an organized community capable of defending itself against institutional predators. The sound of children playing in the distance mixed with cattle lowing peacefully, creating the soundtrack of normal life returning despite ongoing chaos. Monday would bring Darlene's final desperate stand, but we were ready for whatever came next. Monday morning brought news that Darlene had crossed the line from desperate to downright criminal. Agent Hayes called at 7 a.m. with an edge in her voice I'd never heard before. Mr. Sullivan, we intercepted communication suggesting Mrs. Wickham is planning something we need to discuss immediately. We met at the same diner where this whole federal investigation had started, but the atmosphere felt different now. Heavier. The smell of bacon grease couldn't mask the tension as Agent Hayes slid a folder across the table. She's attempting to bribe federal witnesses, she said quietly. Recorded phone calls offering cash payments to neighbors who'd recant their testimony and withdraw from your civil rights lawsuit. The recordings were damning. Darlene's voice, unmistakably desperate, offering Martha $50,000 to remember things differently about the harassment timeline. Rico got a call promising $75,000 plus immigration assistance if he'd claim our community had misunderstood her intentions. Federal witness tampering carries mandatory prison time, Agent Hayes explained. She's essentially confessing to obstruction of justice while we're recording everything. But the most chilling revelation came from electronic surveillance the FBI had been conducting under federal warrant. She's been coordinating with accomplices across 3 counties, Agent Hayes continued. This isn't just about your neighborhood anymore. It's a multi-jurisdictional criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable communities throughout North Texas. The scope was staggering. Darlene had been running similar harassment schemes in Plano, McKinney, and Frisco, systematically targeting elderly and minority homeowners through coordinated HOA fraud. Federal investigators had identified 47 families affected by her operations over the past 5 years. Thursday brought the false flag operation that finally triggered her arrest. At 3 a.m., 911 received an anonymous call reporting explosive devices stored in my workshop, claiming I was planning to retaliate against neighborhood safety advocates through domestic terrorism. The response was immediate and overwhelming. SWAT team, bomb squad, federal agents, my peaceful ranch became the center of a terrorism investigation based on completely fabricated claims. They found exactly what anyone with half a brain would expect: aircraft tools, restoration materials, and absolutely nothing dangerous or illegal. But the psychological impact was devastating. Neighbors woken by sirens, children terrified by tactical teams, community trust shattered by false emergency response. Security footage later revealed the smoking gun. Darlene's BMW parked near my property 30 minutes before the 911 call, her distinctive silhouette visible making the anonymous report from a burner phone. Filing false terrorism reports is a federal felony, Agent Hayes explained as investigators processed the scene. She's just escalated from white-collar fraud to domestic terrorism charges. The mini twist came Friday when Rico's computer forensics revealed something that changed everything. "Garrett, I've been analyzing her digital footprint," he said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. "She's not just targeting random families, she's using demographic data to specifically select victims." The targeting wasn't random harassment. It was systematic social engineering designed to change neighborhood demographics through intimidation and forced displacement. "Look at the pattern," Rico continued. "Every family she's attacked has been elderly, minority, working class, or military veterans. She's literally trying to engineer suburban gentrification through legal terrorism." Martha connected the final dots with her teacher's analytical skills. "The timing correlates with school district rezoning proposals," she realized, pulling up city planning documents. "If she can force out enough families, the demographic shift could trigger boundary changes that benefit property values in adjacent developments." Darlene hadn't just been running real estate fraud, she'd been conducting social engineering to manipulate municipal policy through demographic manipulation. But her support network was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. HOA board members resigned en masse rather than face legal exposure. Professional associates publicly distanced themselves to avoid criminal association. Even her expensive lawyers withdrew from representation, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts. The isolation accelerated her increasingly desperate and irrational decisions. Saturday brought reports of her confronting neighbors directly, screaming accusations about conspiracy and federal overreach to anyone who'd listen. She'd show up at grocery stores, coffee shops, even children's sporting events, ranting about government persecution while witnesses documented her erratic behavior. "She's having a complete psychological breakdown," Martha observed after Darlene approached her at the farmer's market, demanding she stop lying to federal agents while other shoppers stared in horror. Sunday evening brought the final piece of federal evidence. Agent Hayes called with news that would end Darlene's crime spree permanently. Federal wiretaps recorded her planning to plant evidence in your workshop to support terrorism claims. We've got her on conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempting to frame federal witnesses. The recorded conversations were devastating. Darlene coordinating with unknown accomplices to place suspicious materials on my property, then trigger another federal investigation that would justify her claims about neighborhood safety threats. "Monday morning, we execute arrest warrants," Agent Hayes said with satisfaction. "Federal grand jury returned indictments on 17 felony counts. She's done." That night, I sat on my porch listening to the peaceful sounds of cattle settling and distant subdivision life continuing despite the chaos. Tomorrow would bring justice, but tonight belonged to the quiet satisfaction of knowing our community had survived systematic attack by standing together. The predator's reign of terror was finally ending. Monday evening arrived with the kind of tension that makes the air itself feel electric. The city council had scheduled a special meeting on neighborhood aviation safety after weeks of Darlene's public pressure campaign. The community center parking lot was packed beyond capacity, over 200 people, 3 news crews, and enough federal agents to staff a small embassy. I sat in the front row with Martha, Rico, and 8 other families from our harassment support group. The familiar scent of burnt coffee and nervous sweat filled the auditorium as people filed in, everyone sensing this would be more than a routine municipal meeting. Darlene arrived fashionably late in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Her expensive attorney flanked her left side while a public relations consultant covered her right, the kind of professional damage control you hire when your life is imploding publicly. She looked confident, almost smug, as she set up her presentation materials. This was her last chance to control the narrative before federal charges became public, and she'd clearly spent serious money preparing for this moment. Council Chairman Bob Peterson called the meeting to order with unusual formality. "Tonight we're addressing aviation safety concerns raised by Mrs. Wickham regarding alleged irregular aircraft operations in the Meadowbrook Estates area." Darlene's presentation was polished perfection. She'd prepared a 40-slide PowerPoint complete with aerial photographs, noise analysis charts, and testimonials from concerned parents about aviation safety hazards. Her claims were specific and technical: constant air traffic over residential areas, inadequate safety protocols, environmental hazards from fuel storage. Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with an unregulated private airport operating in clear violation of residential zoning, she declared, her voice projecting maternal concern mixed with civic authority. Our children's safety demands immediate action, the audience murmured appreciatively. Without context, her presentation seemed reasonable, even compelling. She'd managed to make aircraft restoration sound like a clear and present danger to suburban family life. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood up calmly. "Mrs. Wickham," I said, addressing her directly while cameras rolled, "could you clarify the timeline of your safety concerns? Specifically, how you knew to file FAA complaints 3 months before any aircraft had ever landed on my property?" The color drained from her face faster than oil from a cracked sump. She stammered something about proactive neighborhood protection, but the damage was spreading through the audience like ripples from a dropped stone. That's when Agent Hayes stepped forward. "Council members, I need to address some serious inaccuracies in tonight's presentation." She identified herself as the FAA investigator assigned to this case, and the room went dead quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and clicking cameras. Federal investigation has determined that Mr. Sullivan's property is fully compliant with all aviation regulations. No violations exist, and no safety hazards have been identified. Agent Hayes continued with devastating precision. More significantly, we've discovered that the complaints against Mr. Sullivan were filed using restricted federal data obtained through criminal activity. Darlene's attorney tried to interrupt, but Agent Hayes held up a hand. "Mrs. Wickham has been systematically filing false federal reports, extorting federal witnesses, and using official government processes to support an ongoing real estate fraud scheme." The auditorium erupted, people turning in their seats, reporters frantically taking notes, council members looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. That's when Rebecca Santos stepped to the microphone. "Council members, I represent 23 families who've been systematically targeted by Mrs. Wickham's criminal enterprise. Tonight's presentation is part of an ongoing pattern of harassment designed to force property sales through legal intimidation." Santos presented our timeline with surgical precision: the targeting pattern, the property acquisitions, the tax fraud, the witness intimidation. Each revelation hit the audience like physical blows. Federal civil rights investigation has documented systematic housing discrimination targeting elderly, minority, and working-class families. Mrs. Wickham has violated multiple federal statutes while operating under color of HOA authority. Darlene finally snapped. "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of composure. "Federal bureaucrats protecting their cronies while honest families suffer. You're all sheep following government propaganda." Her attorney grabbed her arm, trying to restrain the meltdown, but Darlene was past caring about legal strategy or public image. "These people think they can hide behind federal agencies and constitutional rights. We won't let undesirable elements destroy our neighborhood values." The mask slipped completely. Undesirable elements rang through the packed auditorium like a confession, confirming every discrimination claim we'd documented. Agent Hayes approached the podium with federal arrest warrant in hand. "Darlene Wickham, you're under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, filing false federal reports, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations." The handcuffs clicked in absolute silence except for camera shutters capturing every second. Her expensive attorney abandoned his client and headed for the exit while she was read her Miranda rights in front of 200 witnesses. Spontaneous applause erupted from harassment victims and community supporters. Martha wiped away tears of relief while Rico hugged his kids. Council members apologized for not investigating earlier complaints about systematic abuse. Outside the community center, neighbors gathered in impromptu celebration. The sound of children laughing mixed with adults sharing relieved conversations. The comfortable noise of community bonds strengthened through shared struggle. We'd done more than defeat one predator. We'd proven that ordinary people could successfully challenge institutional corruption when they stood together with courage and determination. The sound of children laughing on my ranch used to be rare. Now it's the soundtrack of every weekend. Darlene's federal conviction brought 18 months in prison plus $2.4 million in restitution. Her real estate empire crumbled as asset forfeiture reversed fraudulent acquisitions, returning stolen homes to original owners at fair prices. Our civil rights lawsuit settled for $50,000 per family with attorney fees paid by defendants. More importantly, court-appointed HOA oversight and mandatory anti-discrimination training ensured no future family would face systematic harassment in our neighborhood. But the real victory was watching fear transform into friendship. Martha's Memorial Garden bloomed into a community gathering space where former strangers now tend vegetables together. The smell of fresh herbs and rich soil replaced the bitter taste of violation notices and legal threats. Rico got promoted after his employer recognized leadership skills displayed during our battle. His kids' basketball games became neighborhood events where people who'd never spoken before cheered side by side. My aircraft restoration business thrived with positive media coverage. Clients appreciated supporting someone who'd stood up to institutional bullying, and my workshop became an unofficial community center where neighbors stopped by for coffee and conversation. The settlement money created something more valuable than individual compensation: the Community Justice Scholarship Program, providing legal education for families facing HOA harassment across Texas. Martha coordinates the scholarship with retired teacher Precision. Rico developed bilingual resources protecting non-English speakers from legal predators who target language barriers. I volunteer educating rural communities about property rights and federal protections. Our documentation methods and legal strategies spread statewide as communities fought their own battles against systematic harassment. What started as neighborhood self-defense became a movement empowering vulnerable families throughout Texas. The systemic impact exceeded our wildest hopes. State legislation now requires HOA transparency and oversight. Our legal precedent for selective enforcement gets cited in federal discrimination cases nationwide. Congressional hearings specifically referenced our case as evidence for stronger homeowner protection laws. Agent Hayes received commendation for investigation work, leading to broader fraud prosecutions. Her federal task force identified 12 similar schemes across Texas using our case as prosecution template. Rebecca Santos got state bar recognition for civil rights advocacy. Social justice organizations study our community organizing model for training activists resisting institutional harassment. Today marks our second annual Community Resilience Day, a celebration drawing families from across the region who've successfully fought systematic abuse through organized legal action. Rico's barbecue smoke mixes with Martha's homemade peach cobbler while children play together like cousins. Adults share stories, plan cooperative projects, and demonstrate that community solidarity beats individual fear every time. Darlene's former house shelters a young military family welcomed warmly by neighbors, eager to show that inclusion, not exclusion, defines our values. Evening walks now include waves from families gardening, kids riding bikes, elderly couples walking dogs, comfortable sights and sounds of people living peacefully without arbitrary harassment threats. Property values recovered completely as positive coverage attracted buyers appreciating both rural tranquility and community strength. Aircraft clients often stay for Martha's cookies and stories about ordinary people defeating institutional corruption. Our experience proved that individual courage plus community organization conquers systematic oppression. When regular folks understand legal rights and support each other through difficult struggles, predators lose their power to intimidate and control. The lesson extends beyond HOA disputes. Whether facing workplace harassment, municipal corruption, or systematic discrimination, communities documenting abuse, securing competent legal help, and maintaining solidarity through long battles can achieve justice against overwhelming odds. Looking back, that airplane crash was the best thing that happened to our neighborhood. Not because of chaos, but because crisis revealed both our vulnerability to predators and our capacity to protect each other when we stopped accepting abuse as inevitable. 3 similar fraud schemes were prosecuted in other counties using our methods. Federal task forces now investigate HOA-related fraud using protocols developed from our case. The national conversation about balancing property management with individual rights continues, but our story proves constitutional protections work when citizens understand how to use them effectively. Here's my challenge. Share your HOA horror story in the comments. You're not alone, not powerless, and don't have to accept harassment as homeownership's price. Subscribe for more stories about communities beating corruption through courage and solidarity. Ordinary heroes, using legal knowledge and mutual support, can defeat institutional oppression anywhere in America. Next week, how a small-town librarian exposed million-dollar municipal corruption using only public records and determination to protect community resources. Remember, predators count on isolation and ignorance. Community knowledge and courage make them powerless.